Welcome to the In-Betwixt and In-Between. This is Leadership Limbo, a podcast aimed at helping middle managers and their supervisors embrace the discomfort and power of leading themselves and others in the midst of it all. We blend real insight with practical tools to help you lead with self-awareness, purpose, and influence. Wherever you are on your leadership journey, I am John Clark, John David Clark today, with
Joshua Paul Hugo.
Paul Hugo, there we go. And a new guest today, our guest with us, Dan Beatty. Welcome, Dan, to the show. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I guess I need to throw my middle name in there too,
please.
since you guys are doing that. It's Daniel Preston Beatty, named after my grandfather. The Preston part.
Okay, so yours is your grandfather. Okay, got
Yeah.
that. David is my father, so I got my father. And Josh, how about Paul?
It was biblical.
Okay.
My dad was a big fan of the letters of Paul, so wanted me to maybe be a writer.
Okay.
Which, I think some of that sometimes shows up. So,
And
yeah.
Was Joshua kind of Jewish influence, and then Paul?
Yeah, a little
more
bit of
Christian
both
for your family, because I know you had a couple religions in your family.
Yeah, my mom's Jewish, my dad's Catholic, and so Joshua was a blending of kind of both. It's a Old Testament person, but also Joshua derives ultimately from Yehoshua, which is the Hebrew form of Jesus, and so of course New Testament, so kind of a bit of both. So yeah, they used kind of the scriptural roots to come up with my first and middle name.
You heard it here, folks. Josh's parents thought he was
Wow.
Jesus. So there we go. Yeah.
Well, my dad was a campus minister in high school, and he also did Jesus presentations where he would kind of go through what would happen, in Jesus's final days.
Okay.
And the kids at the high school that he worked at, which is where I ended up going, called him Jesus. And so I was called the son of Jesus for a number of years, which to double up with my name, Joshua, was, I guess there's worse things to be called when you go into high school when you don't know anyone.
Yeah.
But that was,
Jesus isn't bad. That's pretty good. It's interesting you say that, because my parents picked Daniel because they were doing a Bible study at that time, and it was almost going to be David, but when she actually had me, they were on the book of Daniel. So I have been in the lion's den for my whole life, really. I think that's
cool.
a good segue into the construction industry, the lion's den.
Yes, sure.
That's awesome.
I think that works. Yeah.
Nice. I feel like we have an episode ahead of us, Josh, just on names and meanings. John, my parents just liked it, and then that became, my sister's name was Jennifer. Then they went with John, and then Julie, so they could have all J's, I guess, just something ridiculous like that. So there we go.
Good first letter.
I don't know. I don't have any. I don't think there was much more to the decision with John, although a strong name, as far as I can tell. So cool. Well, welcome to the show, Dan. Josh, you want to intro our guest here?
Yeah, definitely. So we'll give Dan his formal introduction. Before that, just a reminder to all of our guests to subscribe, to share this podcast, to leave us a review. I listened to another podcast today, and I've heard it like 7 times, where he encourages...
It was terrible. You hated it because this is so much better. No.
Well, I mean, both things can be true, but here's my point, is he's encouraged the listeners every episode. Please, your reviews really help us. Yeah. It helps our podcast get found. It helps give us feedback. It helps validate that what we're doing here is hopefully meaningful. And I've listened to it for months, and I'm like, I don't have time. I'm driving, I'm biking. So I literally pulled over today on my bike. I took out my phone and I gave him 5 stars. Nice. So if you can do the same thing today, it matters. John and I do pay attention to it. We have weak egos, and we really need your validation. But beyond your validation, we actually just like getting our word out there, and would appreciate it if you take the time. But without any further ado, Dan, who you've heard already, for our listeners who are watching on YouTube, you've seen him. But yeah, today we're going to have a great conversation with Dan Beatty. Dan spent more than 3 decades in the construction industry, growing from the field and project side into a trusted advisor for leaders and organizations. He is the founder and principal consultant of Constructive Leadership Solutions. Great name. I think there's a few, like a double entendre in there, at least, that we're going to have to explore. But in this space, Dan works with contractors, project teams, and industry associations to turn everyday managers into leaders people actually want to follow. Dan's work combines real job site experience with practical tools. Another fellow giant guide along with myself. Dan works in a giant worldwide ecosystem where he focuses on self-awareness, values-based decision-making, and what he calls multiplying leaders, not just adding more work. We'll love to hear more about what that means. And he regularly partners with groups like AGC's Advanced Management Program to help rising leaders know themselves, lead themselves, and build healthy, high-performing teams. And at his core, Dan cares about one thing: fighting for the highest possible good in the lives of the people he leads and serves, whether that's on a project, in a boardroom, or across the industry. So, Dan, welcome to the show today. And it's really good to have you here.
Oh, thank you for having me, Josh. It's great to be here, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Well, let's get started. For our listeners who don't know you yet beyond what I've just shared,
Mm.
tell us a little bit more about your story, the work that you've done, and how that kind of brought you to the work that you're doing today.
Well, interestingly enough, when I was a kid, my father was an insurance salesman, but he got me involved in construction early on because we needed to have a new church. We were outgrowing the one that we were in, and he got his contractor's license the old-fashioned way, which was by a correspondence course, which was
Oh.
kind of strange. He would get
Hmm.
little manuals each week, and he'd have to fill out tests, and he'd mail it in and all that. And so I learned early on I had a real talent for demolition because I wasn't good at building things, but boy, I could break stuff really good. And but then the funny thing is, for me anyway, I had a kind of a crossroads that happened in middle school, wherein I was working on job sites with my father since I was a little kid, but I also happened to love theater. And I was in plays, and I thought, oh man, I'm going to go to the Baltimore School for the Arts, and it's going to be great, and what have you. And my parents said, no, no, you're not going to do that. You're going to actually go to the Baltimore Polytechnic Institute and become an engineer. I'm like, okay. And that's what I did. And because of that theater background, to bring it full circle, I think of my career sort of as a three-act play, in that act
Hmm.
one was where I learned the parts and pieces of how to be a engineer, how to be a project manager, a superintendent out there in the field making stuff happen. And then children came along. And so I needed to shift into act two, which involved being a pre-construction slash estimating person, because the basically the time frames were a lot better than working out in the field. I didn't have to
Hmm.
put in 80-hour weeks to be an effective estimator. And then now I find myself in act three, where all gets resolved, and I am
Hmm.
giving back to the industry. I'm also reaching back into act one, because part of what I do is workshops and training and speaking, and that's not a whole lot different from the theater. So
Hmm.
that's what got me here. And what I have enjoyed from that, as running this new company that I started basically last February, is that people in our industry are very, very technically adept at what they're doing. I mean, they're some of the best, most bright people, but they have a whole lot of work to do on being able to communicate effectively, how to make sure their culture is where it needs to be and helpful and growing and open to other people. And I kind of look at it as creating people-centric leadership. And that's kind of the mission that I have for however much more time I have in this space.
Hmm. Nice. Yeah. Thanks, Dan.
Mhm.
John, if you had a question, otherwise I can jump
Well,
in.
well, yeah, I'm interested in the theater part of this. And I know we're going to talk too long about storytelling. And I think that's a
Sure.
really cool concept to be talking about. I think in an industry where people don't often think about the arts or storytelling per se. Well, I also, my uncle ran a construction company, so I worked with them for a number of years. And so how did that influence of the theater and the way, even the way you're describing your life as a 3-act play, influence the way you think about leadership from a storytelling perspective, and how that's so important in the industry you're in specifically, but maybe in any form of leadership?
That's a great question. I think what makes storytelling so powerful, or even the theater for that matter, is that it engages your emotions. It engages your ability to make pictures in your head of things, and that's what connects you. And as I said in the sort of preamble, that in construction, so much focus is given to the technical ability, the
Right.
so-called IQ, your intelligence quotient, right? But that's only one piece of the puzzle. There's also the personal quotient, which is, who am I as a person? Am I a well-rounded person? Can I communicate well, and what have you? And then there's the emotional quotient. What do I do? How does it affect others? How does where I come from cause other people, either happiness, distress, or something in between? And so for me, if you can effectively communicate and paint pictures, which is basically what storytelling is, if you're able to do that, you're able to connect with another person on a deeper level so that you can be more influential. And that's really what leadership is about. It's about, can I positively influence you to create something that we need to create, as well as help you grow? And that's what I mean by multiplying and, creating leaders of that caliber.
Yeah. In the construction industry, where do you find in your work with leaders is the most, like, what are the key ways that you find that people can use storytelling effectively? Can you provide us with some examples or ways that you're meeting with someone for the first time and you're talking to them about this as a leader? Where are you hoping that
Right.
shows up for them in the first time if this hasn't been part of their frame of thought?
Well, first of all, you have to be able to make a connection with a person. So a lot of times storytelling can be a way of creating rapport. So you go
Right.
in and you speak to folks. Where I have some credibility, if you will, is that, and I love to use this term, I chewed the same dirt they did. Okay. So automatically they'll be open to maybe listening to what I have to say, because I've experienced some of it. And some of the ways that you can use stories is, don't just sit there and make war stories and like, oh yeah, when this
Yeah.
happened, and then, but there's no outcome. There's no, well, this is how I overcame it, or this is what I learned from that experience. Because a lot of times, you'll have storytelling and then people just end up, complaining or what have you. So the key is to establish some credibility up front, and then just say, hey, you know what? I'm understanding where you're coming from. Here's an example that happened to me, and here is my takeaway. If you don't give the takeaway, if you don't give the lesson or the moral of the story, if you will, then it just ends up, you're just basically whining
Yeah.
at the end of
Yep.
the day.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
Dan, did you have any teachers, so to speak, that modeled the storytelling for you in the construction space or maybe outside of it? I think I often have noticed in my own life that there's some people who are just really good at it. And oftentimes you start tracing where that comes from. It was they had a very talkative, engaging family setting, perhaps, maybe some really histrionic sort of uncles in the family gatherings, or possibly somebody on the job site. Do you have any mentors or people that, as you look back in your career, you can attribute some of your usage of storytelling to their model to you?
now that you mentioned that, it does make me think about my Uncle Sam. And
Hmm.
not not the one that's going to be around for our 4th of July thing. His actual name was Sam, and he actually was my uncle. And he was in the construction industry, full blown. He was a superintendent, and he told stories about how they were building bridges up in Pennsylvania, and they were actually pouring the concrete beams that form the ribs and I found that fascinating. And I also looked at my Uncle Sam, because he was an excellent storyteller. He was just a very jovial. I think he was my uncle by marriage, so his last name was Emai. So he was like this Swedish big, come on and visit us and let me tell you a bunch of stories. And he had a big old cigar in his mouth. And I thought that right there is a real man. And I dig what he's doing and I want to do what he's doing. So he was probably my first dad. And of course, my dad, going out, and dad didn't smoke cigars, but that's another story. It was a fantastic bathing into it. And so when I actually got out into the field, I had a series of a couple of superintendents I also worked with who were in the industry for a long time, super crusty, lots of stories that I could not repeat here for this audience. But it was a way, again, of making rapport. It was a way of saying, hey, listen, we do a very hard job. We do a hard job that's dangerous. So one of the ways we deal with that is telling stories and being bigger than life, even though probably deep down inside we're scared to death.
Yeah. So a question for you. I think, we hear this a lot, and I love when leaders really talk about the point that storytelling is a way, humans can communicate through narrative, right? That's just the way we've been in our DNA forever. And so it seems to me in a lot of things you read, there is a lot out there in literature on the power of storytelling, the power of narrative, how that influences people, shapes them. And yet it seems often a very difficult thing to get people to buy into the power of that as a leader, and how telling stories and building the story of what's possible for folks is the way to motivate. And instead people fall on things more of like directiveness or, platitudes, but not with the story. So what is it that holds people back in your mind from storytelling and from using that as a way to lead? And how do you find ways to convince them that this is the way to spend time as a leader, building this skill so they can more effectively lead people?
Well, if I figure out that, I will become incredibly wealthy, because people will be beating down my door to find out that answer. In actuality, I think that the main problem here is, and I can only, again, speak for the construction industry because that's what I know. I mean, I tend to think it is industry wide, and that is, it is very difficult to be able to describe what the return on investment for doing that is. So like in my world, sure, let's go get some OSHA training to make sure we're safe. Let's go ahead and do some cost estimating, because if we get sharper at that, we can win more work. It's tangible. It's easier for them to visualize, right? It's like, you do X, you get this Y result. Thank you very much. Very transactional. The problem is, how do you describe what being able to communicate better, or what kind of teams do you have as far as getting along, and how do they work together? And one of the things that binds you together are the way that you tell stories, the way that you describe things, the way that you visualize things. How do you put an ROI on that? How do you give me a metric that says, if I do this, tell stories really well and connect with people, it will get me this result? You can't really do it, because every individual is different. Everyone's going to receive the story differently, right? And so the main issue here is the way I get about through that is, all right, I'll come in the front door and teach you hard skill X, Y, and Z. And while I'm in there, I'm going to also tell some stories. I'm going to connect with you on that level. And then when you didn't notice, I'm going to tell you at the end, well, part of the reason why this is successful is because we told stories, and maybe we need to tell some more. that's probably the only way I can figure right now to do it. If I come up with something different, I'll let you know.
Yeah, you can come back on the podcast and we'll help
Yeah.
promote it. So that'll be great.
Yeah, absolutely.
Dan, you're bringing up something that I think is probably not just industry specific. I think that the challenge of and I'm going to extrapolate not just from stories and visualization. What I'm really going to pull out as kind of the umbrella to that is this work we're talking about building trust, building rapport, building relationship, the adaptive skills, the quote unquote soft skills. That's a lot of what we talk about on this podcast. And,
Right.
we all run our own businesses. We all spend a lot of time trying to talk to people who think it's valuable, might on some level think it's nice. Other levels might actually say, no, we need it. And others kind of scoff and say, yeah, that's, we don't have time for that. And so I think what you're pointing to is a real dilemma that leaders face often, which is this tension between we have the work in front of us that feels very tactical, very mechanical, very,
time bound.
And then we have this work that is about the connection, the human angle. And I think when you framed the response to the first question, you had said something of, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dan, you might have even said this when we were talking in Orlando, that we're not I think you said something to the effect of, this is not a construction business that has people in it. It's a people business that does construction work. And I don't want to falsely attribute that to you. You might have said it, but I think that idea is kind of what's coming up for me. And here's my question. How are you seeing the construction industry today navigating this tension? Are you seeing any tides change as newer generations are coming into higher levels of leadership? Or do you feel like you're still fighting this proverbial battle between this kind of competing tensions?
Well, first of all, it is a relationship business. That's what construction is. And it just so happens that you build stuff. And I would love to take credit for that quote. I think it might have been Mark Twain, but I attribute that to everything to Mark Twain. So, because he said a lot of good stuff.
You did.
But in construction today, what is exciting to me is that I do see the younger generations, especially specifically Generation Z, they are requiring more meaning and purpose to what they do.
Yeah.
And as a matter of fact, they are not, as a cohort in general, as enamored with chasing the brass ring or becoming a leader necessarily. What they're interested in is doing something meaningful that is helpful and that offers purpose, right? Which is, again, why would storytelling would be really effective for that particular group. And there is evidence that shows as more younger people are getting into the industry, they're recognizing, hey, you know what? You can actually make a really good living in the trades. You don't have to have college debt if that's not your bag, if you're not interested in going to college. You can go right into the trades. You can do something that AI is not going to take away. At this point, AI does not weld or put in HVAC systems. So there is that aspect of it. So I see it shifting. And the other thing that I see shifting that is a good thing is that more and more women are getting into the industry, which I think is a fantastic thing. That's going to help with the culture quite a bit, in my humble opinion, in that some of the archaic ideas that have been around construction for a long time. Look, it's still a male-dominated industry, and it has been forever. And that needs to loosen up a little bit if we are going to be in the 21st century and being a modern industry that embraces everybody.
I want to try an exercise here, and we could fall flat on our face, but let's see how this goes. We can always edit it out. But I want to like walk through a few different things in your industry, particular, like a few circumstances, and ask you to tell me, where does story fit into this, and how would
Okay.
you like consult with someone or a leader in these kind of situations? And the
All right.
goal here is, I think, to help other listeners of ours to imagine, how am I thinking about storytelling in the various contexts with which I work as a leader, right? So let's
Mm.
just like, there's a new project coming on. You have a foreman, and they're about to help get a group, their team engaged in this project. How do you get them? How does storytelling help to fit into to them explaining or sharing about the project itself and what they're doing there?
Okay. Well, I love what Stephen Covey did in The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People,
Mm.
in that one of the habits was begin with the end in mind.
Cool.
And when you begin with the end in mind, you're creating a picture or a story for the group. So if you are the middle manager, if you are the leader or superintendent, project manager, what have you, and you have this foreman, depending on the level of experience, what you as a leader of the foreman could do, beginning with the end in mind, is saying, all right, here is how this project was estimated. Here was the plan that we had. Here's the picture. This is where we thought we would put the storage area. This is where we think that the trailers ought to go. And just create a picture for this person and say, do you have any thoughts? You invite them into the story is the way
Mm.
to do it. I said, well, this is what we saw. This is what we planned, but here we are now where the rubber meets the road, and you've been doing this for quite a while. What do you think? And then you engage them in a conversation after having painted a picture. Because
Yeah.
again, most people, especially it's a male dominated industry, as I said, males are particularly visually
Yeah.
oriented. So paint a picture, give them an idea. And I was like, okay, well, also, here are the dollars and cents things, right? Here's the schedule. Here are is your budget, and we need to get from A to B to C, and this is our idea. What's yours?
Yeah.
That's the way
Do you
I'd approach it.
do you think there's effectiveness too in helping people to see, like, at the end of this, how this is going to be lived in, how people are going to use it, like the communities that are going to be there, and
Mm.
do you think people like get better inspiration from that than just like, okay, here's stage one, here's stage two, here's stage three, and then we're out?
There's no question about it when
Yeah.
you do that, because what you tap into is, what are their values? What does a person that does construction, what do they value? And I've
Mm.
written about this on my LinkedIn sites and things of that nature. I read a wonderful book and met the gentleman who wrote it. His name is David Allison. The name of the book is The Death of Demographics, and
Mm.
basically did a lot of mm, surveys internationally with people to figure out what are people's main values, and which is what actually gives people incentive to do things. Doesn't matter whether we're male, female, what race we are, religion, any of that stuff, really. Those are just extrinsic things that don't get to the core of who you are as a person. And so invariably when you study construction under those rubrics, one of the biggest values in construction of the people that perform it is that of service and that of belonging. And so the service piece, invariably, every room I've ever been in that construction people talk about, they always talk about, oh my goodness, I love going by projects that I
Mm.
helped build. There is a sense of purpose, there is a sense of accomplishment, a sense of service that they get that they don't get anywhere else. That's, why they do it. Are there some people that just join to get a paycheck? Well, of course, you're always going to run into that. But the majority of people, I think, do the work because of the what you get from it. What they get from it is there's camaraderie. There are people that do something really hard together, sort of that. I'm I'm saying band of brothers, but women are involved in this too. But you have that sense of belonging, that sense of, man, I'm a part of something bigger than myself, and it feels good.
Yeah. Well, let me give you two more. So this next one is more of like, as a foreman or leader, is how does storytelling actually fit in my building relationship like a leader employee relationship with those I manage, and trying to develop them and support them. How might I think about using that as I'm connecting with and supporting people on my team individually?
Well, if you're going to go outside of the realm of just the project, then I guess storytelling at this point would be about personal development. So at
Mhm.
that, you're going to talk to the foreman about, so what are some aspirations that you might have? Or like, where do you see yourself after this project's over? Or is there some new skill that you're interested in exploring that you don't have right now? Or is there something about what we just did that either didn't sit right with you or that you would like more of? It's more of a conversation. It's like, as a leader, I think the most effective leaders are coaches, really.
Yeah.
And what's a coach? A coach is a teacher. And that is, okay, so tell me, after what we just did, how did you feel about it? What did you get out of it? How do you see yourself moving forward? And ask them these open-ended questions that gets them thinking, gets them deciding, oh, well, you know what? I did enjoy XYZ that we did, and I'd like to know a little bit more about that because I really, I was a little shaky in the beginning, but I think that's a cool thing.
Yeah.
Dan, in those, just a follow up, and I know you have a third one, John, but Dan, in those conversations, as you're probing with these questions as a coach, I'm curious where the story fits in terms of how often are you revealing like your own story,
Hmm.
like what I would call like the concept of self reveal.
Mhm.
Like,
That's a
I'm going to
yeah.
ask you these questions, but here's a little context from my own journey. Do you find that's where storytelling weaves into your coaching space, or do you kind of leave that outside of it?
No, you definitely do that. The thing that you have to be careful of with that, I have found, you can't make it about yourself too much. Because if it's like, "Oh, well, I did this and this is what happened, and you might want to think about this," then you come off as some sort of, Moses on high bringing down the tablets with your incredible insights and things.
Yeah.
If you can do it in such a way where you're not necessarily talking about yourself as if you're the hero of the story. You're saying, wow, well, under similar circumstances, this is what happened, this is what I did, and this is what happened afterwards.
Mm.
Maybe that's benefit to you. You always ask ahead of time whether or not, is that, well, would you be open to listening to some insights? I have some thoughts on this if you think it would be helpful. If you get that buy-in at the first,
Mm.
then it doesn't sound like, you're being, dad and saying, well, you should check your tires before you go on a trip. It's things like that.
It's very fitting for John today.
Well,
Oh,
I fell off my bike because I need new tires on it, is what it came down to, but I'm okay.
well, I'm glad you're okay, but you got to check that air pressure. Come on, John.
The air pressure was fine. It was the balding. It's the baldness
Ah,
of the tires. That's the real issue. Not to make more bald jokes here, but
oh yeah.
yeah.
I'm all about
Right.
baldness, as you can tell. Yes.
No, before I get into the last one here, I think Josh's point or question there really is great. And the one thing I noticed in your responses is it's not just about you as the leader being the storyteller, it's inviting others into their own storytelling too, right? Like, how do
Yeah.
my questions promote their creative thinking and their building of a why or a rationale or why this matters to me beyond like I just need to be somewhere for 10 hours a day making money, right? Like, how do we,
Yeah.
certainly that's important. Like, we all like having income, but the point of I like this idea of more of, as this is evolving, it's inviting others into story and how I, as a
Yes.
leader or a coach, invite them in. I think it's a great, Josh and I talk a lot about coaching, but I don't know that one of those is really this frame of, hey, when you're coaching, how do you invite people into narrative building, right? And I really love that.
Mm,
So the last one I think
Absolutely.
fits in with that is circumstances where complexity or challenge enters into the equation. You might imagine something bad happens with a project that really puts it off the rails and gets it off course, or for some reason you end up down a couple folks and there's less people working on the project than was originally there, things that can happen. So how does storytelling in those moments of complexity maybe help a leader kind of guide people through those moments?
Well, if in fact you have in your history something parallel to what's currently happened, I guess you could bring that up. But if you don't have that, then at a certain point, you tap into people's emotions. Remember what I said about the fact that there's so much in construction where they're comfortable with the data. But again, data just talks to the head.
Yeah.
Story connects the head and the heart. So maybe you wrap up a story, even if it didn't necessarily happen to you. Maybe it's something that you heard of, or maybe if it's an apocryphal story that, you know, maybe it's not even actually happened, but it's illustrative. Is that the way you say it?
Yeah.
Illustrative?
Great.
Illustrative?
Beautiful.
I
Yeah.
don't know.
Yeah.
Tomato, tomato. But, it's not necessarily something for people to. What it does is that stories will lower people's
Yeah.
defenses. That's the key. And so if the project didn't go so well, or, as long as there were reasons for it, you can talk about it. You can talk about the elephant in the room. You can discuss. It's like, hey, you know what? Maybe be self-deprecating. Say, you know what? I should have done this. I think it affected things maybe negatively. What do you think? Again, invite them into that story, lower
Mm.
their defenses, give them something in order to have a real conversation. Because a lot of times in leadership, what happens is there's this hierarchy that is created, and sometimes folks do not want to express themselves because they feel like, this is, I'm going to get myself in trouble if I tell you exactly what I
Yeah.
think. Whereas if you are more self-deprecating, if you say, hey, you know what? I can recall another project that went off the rails for certain reasons, or, we're down a couple of people right now. So what it's going to mean is that we all have to pick our game up a little bit in the short term. Meanwhile, I'm going to help you as much as I can. Remember at the beginning, it's like I want to fight for your highest possible good. And while I'm doing that, I'm also going to try to get some people to help us
Yeah.
out so that we're not carrying the load all by myself. Again, lower the defensive, be
Mm.
human, admit when you make mistakes, and be real about it.
Yeah. I think building on that hierarchy point, a situation where your team's in complexity, I think a lot of leaders tend towards, all right, now I need to just like take control of this and say, we're going to get there, but I'm going to tell you what to do. And you better do it. And we better do it on time or else.
Sure.
Instead, it seems that the better, when people have most effect, it's like, hey guys, this kind of sucks right now. Let's imagine where we want to be 3 weeks from now, though. Let's like build that together and people name it. And then you say, great, how are we going to get there? And people build that
Sure.
story together. Way more impactful than when you're building that together than just like, well, I will personally pull us through this by making you guys do what I say.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
And that is endemic to the construction
I
industry.
bet.
I mean, it is the I mean, I guess that and the military probably, or it's top down, it's command and control. It's still that way, even though people, it's been shown clearly that people don't relate to that very well.
Hmm.
So what you would hope for is that you have a leader who recognizes what people need. And as Josh is well aware, as a giant guide like myself, there's a wonderful tool called the support challenge matrix. And that is, if you want to liberate people, you have to give them high challenge, but also high support. Meaning, hey, we've got this incredible challenge ahead of us, but I'm going to do everything I possibly can to give you all of the support that you need to get the work done. And by the way, I'm also going to roll my sleeves up and join you down in the pit as well. You do that, it liberates people. It makes them feel like, hey, I'm being supported and I don't mind the challenge because I have support. I have other people here in the pit with me. Whereas what you described, that would be high challenge, but low support, command and control. Well, that just gets you in a dominating situation, and you don't want that. So that's what you try to do at all times, because even on any particular day, you're going to be at different spots. You're going to sometimes support and sometimes not, sometimes challenge, sometimes not. And the idea is, hey, let me always try to get back to what I know is good. You're not going to be there 100% of the time.
Yeah. Dan, what's coming up for me and with I think your responses and these questions is the value of narrative building, of storytelling, of visualization is it introduces additional ways of knowing, right? We can over index on very kind of project management central approaches. Here's the objective, here's the key results, here's the goal, here's the metrics, here's the checklist, here's the rubric, here's the safety protocols. They all have value. But when you
Sure.
over index or over rely on that as a source of information to get people to the end result, and you don't tap into other ways of knowing, other ways of thinking, and including narrative building, the connection that exists underneath that, the visualization, and all of the ways that your brain is stimulated to think about the potential of something when you do it differently, there's so much to be said about the value of introducing that. And, even just a hypothesis, a working hypothesis I'm kind of thinking about out loud here is for an industry that has been, to your point, heavily reliant upon that sort of left brain way of thinking, the very analytical approach and a top-down model, you put those two things together, you have a lot of people who have a lot of untapped potential who haven't been invited into creating that kind of narrative, who haven't been created or invited to creating that sort of what does it look like for us to be successful? And I wonder how much the future of the construction industry could even be bolstered by a much more intentional approach to tapping into some of these right brain ways of knowing. I'm curious to get your reaction to that as someone who's been in the industry for 3 decades.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, Josh, that's my whole, I'm going to get French on you, raison d'être. I mean, that's
Mm,
why I'm existing right now, is to
mm,
try to help convince the industry just what you said. And again, the sales job, if you will, is hard because there's no KPIs that I can give you for soft skills. Maybe they exist somewhere. I've been looking all over the place. But the problem is that the other thing, you have different levels of motivation, different levels of capacity within the industry. There are going to be some people at the front lines, maybe even, who aren't going to relate to this at all, even though it makes sense. It's
yeah.
not a panacea.
Mm,
The storytelling and the connection and inviting people in. I think it's incredibly necessary and helpful, but there's still going to be, a level of person in the industry who says, I don't want to hear all that stuff. Just point me in the right direction, tell me what I'm supposed to do, and I'll do this until it's time to leave. That's it.
Yeah.
And you're not going to reach them, and you're going to have to be okay with that. Another metaphor I guess you could use, you have rock stars and you have superstars. I didn't invent that, but the idea is rock stars, they're the people that show up, do their job, and they are very, very reliable. And then there are superstars who have this almost innate ability to transcend things and to be incredible leaders or can be unbelievably creative or whatever. And as a leader yourself, you have to be able to orchestrate both types of folks that come in there. I always like to think of the middle manager as the conductor of an orchestra.
Yeah.
And each person on the team plays a different instrument. Some of them are big and loud percussion instruments, and others are very delicate string instruments. And as a leader, you have to be able to combine those things in a way that gives you a beautiful piece of music and not
mm.
focus on any one part, but of the blending of it.
That's a great metaphor. I like
Thank
that.
you.
You can really picture it because, yeah, when you think about an orchestra, there's just so many dynamics. You have your crescendos and decrescendos, and you have all of these different sounding instruments. And like if you watch like these very high level conductors and you just can picture them like, their emotions going up, their focus, their ability to manipulate like they're almost telling a story through their own orchestration, right? And they're
Yes.
providing visuals for their own orchestration. And yes, all of the work in the background, some of the project management work and like the very specific, like how do we play these things? But I think the idea of a middle manager as a conductor, I also like that too, because oftentimes we might attribute that, oh, that's just the CEO's job. They're
Hmm.
the conductor. But frankly, it's the people on the front line who are managing, frontline workers who are the ones who have 10, 15, 20. My sister at one point had 35 direct reports as a nurse manager, 35 people directly reporting to her. Those are the people who truly need those conductor skills. And I
Yes.
love that metaphor. Yeah, I'm just reacting to that. I appreciate you sharing that. I like it a lot.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because I mean, another way to think of it too is they are the linchpin. They are between, the middle manager is between the C-suite and their vision or whatever. Hey, this is where we're headed. This is what the company's about, yada yada. And then you have the frontline people in the field who have their own, way of looking at things, their own concerns. And so again, blending the two is like, all right, I have to translate what the C-suite wants to the people at the front line. And then conversely, I need to translate what the people on the front lines, the practical people, the ones that are making it happen, transfer it back up to the C-suite so that they're not, going off the rails and having unrealistic expectations or things of
Yeah.
that nature and say, hey, wait a minute, you're getting out over your skis here, and they're the linchpin, the people that
Mhm.
are doing that balance between the two ends. I find that another good way to look at it.
And I mean, if you walk on a project site or in our context, walk into a school, walk into a kitchen, and you can tell when like the orchestra's not working together, when there's just
Oh
like,
yeah,
whether it's how messy the place is or people are running around, like you can tell when things aren't in sync almost
sure,
immediately, right? So imagine being in an audience and you're watching an orchestra that is clearly not in sync. I mean, we see
right.
that in our workplaces too. And so I think I have one question kind of related to storytelling is I do feel like it's sometimes people can equate storytelling or that can turn into I don't ever like to use this term as someone I can come up with like toxic positivity of like a leader not being grounded enough in reality according to those they're leading. And like he's just over there telling stories or helping us build stories, but he's not getting at the heart or she's not getting at the heart of actually our problem. How do you help people to understand like how they use story to ground us in the reality of the challenge we're facing or the difficulty while still using that as an aspirational tool for where we're going to get as a team or in this project? Or do you see that as a challenge sometimes?
Well, I think again the challenge, and I think I said it before, is the story has to be grounded, it has to be honest, and
Yeah.
it has to have a clear point. So, and there has to be a takeaway. So let's just say I was in an estimate review and there was a bad onboarding experience for the new estimators or things of that nature. It's just being honest, giving them a takeaway, and then, not making the mistake of trying to polish over reality or renaming it, or, as I said before, getting into war stories. You have to have a takeaway. There has to be a moral to the story. There has to be an outcome that you're shooting for. Otherwise, you're just sitting around, telling stories with no point. That doesn't help. I mean, just because somebody might be an entertaining storyteller doesn't mean they're an effective storyteller. An
Mm.
effective one actually uses story to connect with people, head and heart, and getting an outcome that you're hoping for or influencing it by using it as a moral tale, you know? That's the way that we as human beings respond, back when we were sitting around campfires and telling stories of the hunt. I mean, it's just how we're built.
Hmm.
Yeah, the best stories have conflict. And I think if that's one thing people can take away is if you're using story, don't hide the conflict, don't hide the challenge from people, or
Oh,
don't force them in their own stories to hide the challenge they're feeling. Like that's
Hmm.
what makes story good, and that's the
absolutely.
point. Also, once we recognize that and we encounter that, we can actually think, okay, and how do we rebound from that, or how do we overcome that challenge as part of that
Right.
too. So I love that. So
That's the key. Yep.
yeah,
Dan, before our final question, we always
Yeah.
like to ask, is there something that you wish we had asked that we didn't and that you'd like to speak to, or any kind of thoughts on your mind that were unfinished, or something that you wanted to share just kind of freely and openly that's kind of running through your mind before we hit our kind of closing part of this podcast?
I think we touched on it, but the only other thing I would say is that when you tell stories or what have you, what you are invoking is having the person visualize something.
yeah,
And so one of the reasons that a lot of people leave the industry is they don't see a roadmap for their journey. All right. Like when you lose so many people when you onboard ineffectively. When you bring somebody new in there and you invite them on and you teach them what your culture is and what it's about, you want to literally map out a process for them. Say, okay, here's what's happening week 1. Okay, in 30 days we're going to be at this point. At 60 days we're going to be at this point. 90 days we're going to be at this point. And then that way we want people to feel welcomed and not on an island, and so that they can visualize a structure. So one of the things, if we didn't touch on it specifically, one of the things a leader needs to do when you're talking about new people, make sure you onboard folks in a way that is effective, that makes them feel like they belong and that they can see a path forward and not just, okay, here are a couple of HR videos for you to look at and then go talk to Jane over there and just do whatever she tells you. That's not effective. It's getting them involved. What is the process? What is it going to look like? Here's telling stories again.
yeah.
At 60, day 60, you're going to have this, and you're going to get a new, different color hard hat because you will have gone through
Hmm.
these steps or whatever it happens to be. Then they have something to shoot for. They have a goal. They have a picture.
Awesome.
Thanks, Dan.
Mhm.
Well, we like to end with a question. John, why don't you take
You
this
want me
one
to
to
take it?
the finish line?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, who's a leader who has inspired you, and what about their leadership has inspired the way you think or work? It can be a well-known, famous person, or just someone real intimate to your own life.
You know, if this has been an effective podcast, this is where I think I might lose people. I don't know.
Yeah, you'll be great.
Believe it or not, and I was asked this question years ago when I had a one-on-one career coaching session. Same thing. Like, what was a leader that you got something out of or emulated? And it's actually a fictional character, and it's from the original Star Trek, Captain Kirk.
Nice.
Captain Kirk for me was one of the best leaders, and here's why. He always put his crew and his ship ahead of him. And I was always blown away by the way he was able to diagnose problems, come up with very creative solutions to these problems, involved and collaborated with his whole team. But he was undoubtedly in charge from beginning to end. And strangely enough, for me, and this is the original Star Trek,
The
the
original,
William
yes.
Shatner. I mean, I know there are some people out there who are big Picard fans. I don't want to get into a debate with you about that. But for me, it's Captain James T. Kirk.
You didn't lose me. I'm here. I'm here for Star Trek. You're good, man. Nailed it. Good.
Yeah, John lit up. For our listeners only, John was glowing because science fiction and famous literature and movies are certainly in his wheelhouse. I proclaim to know nothing about Star Trek, which actually might be the real death knell in this podcast. If your answer wasn't, Dan, but if 50% of our listeners are Trekkies, I'm really apologizing for my lack of knowledge there. But something to learn. And speaking of something to learn, I really did enjoy this podcast because I think it's a place that John and I, before we kicked it off, talked about, we really haven't incorporated the ideas of visualization and storytelling and other ways of building investment in the people that you lead, and building motivation, building context. And I really, a lot of takeaways from this, but one that really jumps out is this idea of how are you helping others as a leader build a narrative for themselves?
Yeah.
And I think that is such a powerful tool that I think we're going to want to come back to a topic like that, because I just know how important it is in my own life to have a narrative that helps make sense of what I'm looking at. So, Dan, thank you for joining us, setting aside some time with us this morning. And it was a real pleasure. And so for our listeners, we'll make sure to put notes in our podcast script that helps you find Dan online on LinkedIn. I know Dan referenced a blog that he writes, and so we'll make sure to include a link to that so you can follow his thoughts and his thinking and his website. And so we certainly hope, especially if you're in the construction industry on the East Coast, I know Dan does work outside of just the East Coast as well, that you guys connect, that you build a new relationship. Dan's a great guy, and we're really happy to have you on the show today, Dan. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Josh, and thank you, John. I really appreciate you having me on. You got great questions, got me thinking about some things that are near and dear to my heart. So hopefully it was of value to you and your audience.
100%. Yeah, definitely.
Well, with that being said, until next time, this has been Leadership Limbo, where we make space for the tension and tools for the journey. See you in the in-between.